Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. Now today we're going to take a look at how to add a high score system into your game. So I've set up this very basic game here. If I press play, we'll see it's essentially just, if I click this play button, a ball, we've got just traveling along, we've got some walls appearing, you have to jump over the walls, and if you touch a wall, you get game over. Very simple, not very complicated, but it allows us to have a very simple scoring and high score system. So we're going to take a look at implementing that now. So obviously you can see we've got a score label here and a high score label. They currently don't do anything. I have nothing to do with scoring set up. If you want to work with this same project as well, the link will be down in the description down below to the project files for this. At this point in time, before we do any more work to it, I'm using Unity version 2019.2.12. Okay, so first thing we need to do is create a script that will allow us to keep track of our score. Now normally if I was making a game I'd put score tracking as part of like the game manager or something like that, but this is a very specific focused little tutorial we're doing here, so we're going to put it in its own script. So I'm going to create a C# script that we'll call score manager, and I'm going to create an object in our scene that I'm going to call score manager as well, like so. And then I'm going to add the score manager script to that, and then I'm going to open it up. So with the score manager script created, first thing I'm going to do is make it a singleton so I can access it from other scripts. So I'll be able to, for example, add score and retrieve what score we have and stuff like that. So for that I'm going to just create a public static version of the score manager that we'll call instance, and then as soon as the game starts, as soon as we have awake and this object exists, we'll say instance equals this. So then from any other script we're able to just instantly access this bit of all the code that we're going to put in here. So what do we want to have? Well, obviously we're going to need to keep track of two things, our score and our high score. So we'll need a public int for the score, and we'll need another one for the high score. And on a very basic level, the first thing we're going to want to do is be able to update that score. So I'm going to go down below my update function here, and I'm going to add a new function called public void add score, like so. And then in here, all this is going to do for the moment is just add one score on to itself. So let's save this and see how we can implement this back in our game. So if I jump back in here, at the moment obviously I have nothing actually telling us to add a score, but just so we can see, we have our score manager, it's all set up, we have 0 and 0 here. Now what I do have set up is, if I go to my game elements here, I've got a wall. So these are the walls that keep spawning. It just keeps spawning a copy of this same wall that we have here. And if I activate it, you'll see it has a trigger box up here. So basically I'm just going to say whenever our player here enters this area which has a tag point zone, we're going to say, okay, when it enters the point zone, tell the score manager to add a score. So I'm just going to deactivate that wall again for our game. Then I'm going to jump to the player, and in the player controller script that I have here, I have function set up for the on trigger enter. So just in case you haven't seen that before, obviously all we have to do is type on trigger enter, and then the autocomplete, if you go on trigger enter 2D down here, I'm going to change the collision name to other, like so. And then in here we're going to say if the other.tag equals, sorry, not player, is equal to point zone, then we're going to tell the score manager dot instance to add score. So we're just going to say as soon as we enter that zone, add a score on. So that's save. Oh no, I don't want to put a 0 in there. Oh, I've entered. There we go. We had overwrite mode activated. There we go. So we don't want to 0. We don't want to pass anything in there. We're just adding 1 point on every time we enter this area. So let's jump back in and make sure that works. How we can test that is by keeping our score manager active and keep an eye on score over here. So if I press play and we play the game, when I jump over a wall, You can see at the top up here we get 1 point being added every time. Okay, so perfect, that's working. So how do we update the high score then? Well, obviously our high score should only be updated. If we go back to our score manager, our high score should be updated whenever our score gets above the current high score value. So how can we do that? Well, we're going to create one extra function. We're going to create a public void update high score. And then in here we're going to say if our score is greater than our high score, well, that means we got a new high score, so we'll set high score is equal to score. So we'll save that. And if I jump back in here now, and if we press play again, let's keep an eye on our high score over here. If I press play, and if I jump over here, we should see our high score is not getting updated because, of course, I didn't actually call that function. There we go. Very simply, we need to go back up here. And below where we're adding a score every time, in this loop, in this function, we'll say update high score. So we want to update our high score every time we actually get a new point. So basically it does a check. Whenever we get a new point, we do a check to see, hey, should we update the high score? So play again. And if I jump over this, we'll see our high score goes up the same as our score. But if I hit a wall and if I play again, you'll see at the moment our score isn't being reset when we die. So obviously we want our score to reset when we get killed. So let's add another function here that we're going to call public void reset score. That should be public there. So we got a reset score, and all this is Lou. We'll just set our score to be equal to 0. And we're going to call that. I have this set up in my my player controller over here. Whenever we hit a wall, we tell our game controller to activate the screen and stuff like that. And then just after that, so the player has been deactivated at this point. Here we're going to say, oh sorry, no, I'm doing this in the wrong place. We're not doing it when we when the player dies. We don't want to reset the score to 0. We want to do it, on the game controller. We have a restart function over here. So I'm going to say here, score manager dot instance dot reset score. So just to show that this is where this is being called from, if I go back into my scripts here, and if I go to my canvas and turn on this panel, you can see there's a play again button here. If I go to this button, you can see it's calling the function gamecontroller.restart. So that's why we put that little line of code in our restart function on the game controller. So that'll tell us to reset the score. So let's make sure that's working. Press play again here. We'll make sure we have our score manager active so we can keep an eye on things. So now when I play, if I jump, we're getting a point and our high score is going up. If I die and we hit play again, our score goes back to 0. So now let's make sure it doesn't go up. It only goes up if our score goes above our high score, which is exactly what it's doing. It's perfect. We'll die again just to verify. We'll see our score goes back to 0 and our high score stays at 4. So that's perfect. That's working. But obviously it would be nice if this would update so our player gets the information as we play. So let's add that into our script. So for that, we'll go back to our score manager. And up the top, we're going to access Unity's UI elements. So we'll say using Unity Engine.UI. And then we're going to add a couple of public text elements. So we're going to have the score text, the high score text, and the game over score text. Okay. So with that in mind then, when do we want to update these? Well, our score text will be updated every time we get a score. And we should really update the game over score text at the same time because that's going to show the exact same information as our score text is telling us. So in our add score function here, just after we update the high score, we're going to write in here the score text dot text should be equal to our score. Now, this is looking for a string. A string is just any collection of characters like that. But we're telling it we want to set it to be equal to an int value, which is obviously just a number. So we need to convert this to a string. And to do that, all we do is say score dot toString. So that's a function that just converts a number into a string so that this text element knows how to show it. So we'll do the same for the game over text. So we'll say game over score text dot text equals score dot toString. And then the other place we need to update is the high score. So the high score will change when our high score is being set here. We'll say the high score text dot text should be equal to the high score, again converted to a string. Okay, so we'll save that. We'll jump back into Unity again. Let that compile. And once that's compiled, we'll have our 3 text slots here. So I'm going to get the score value here and pop it in there. I'll get the high score value and pop it in there. And then on the game over panel, we have game over score value, and we'll pop that in there too. Okay, so let me just collapse this stuff again. And now when I press play, if I hit the play button here, we should get, when I jump over a wall, our score here gets updated and our high score is getting updated too. So that's perfect. That's working the way we want it to. If I die, we should get the game over score here being 4 as well. Now, we're going to notice one area that we should update things as well. If I play again, our score still says 4 here. So we need to make sure that back over in our game controller here, when we're telling the score manager to reset its score, we also want to say, hey, score manager. Actually, no, sorry, we won't do it here. We'll do it in the reset score function. Back over here in our reset score, we're going to say, copy the score text value here and paste it in. We don't need to update the game over score. We probably should actually. We'll do both of these. Because what if the player doesn't manage to score any more points before they hit a wall? Okay, so let's just test that as well. It's important always, always, always to test things as you go. So we want to make sure that everything you're doing works correctly. So if I jump over this, get 2, and if I hit the wall, play again, there we go, our score gets reset back to 0. And I get 1, and I die, there we go. So perfect. Our score is being shown correctly, but obviously now, hey, I've got a high score of 2. If I stop the game and start running again, hey, my high score is 0. We don't want our high score to be reset every time we stop playing our game, so we want to be able to save that score value. And we can do that very, very simply using the player prefs system. So the player prefs is something that's built in to your machine, basically, and this will save it onto your computer very, very simply. This is a way more straightforward way of saving data than just creating your own save system, which is something that we'll probably cover on the channel a little bit soon. But for now, what we're going to do is, all we have to do is add 2 very, very simple lines of code. Well, 1 line of code for now, and we'll add another one in a few moments. So what we need to do is basically when we update the high score here, all we're going to say is player prefs dot set int, and we need to give it a name. So we're going to store an int value, and we need to tell it the name of the int we want to store. So the name of the int that we want to store is the high score. And then the value we want to give it is whatever our high score currently is. And that's it. That's how we save data very, very simply. You can save int values, float values, or string values into the player prefs. So they're very handy and very simple for basic data. Obviously, if you want to make, if you want to save more complex things like custom objects and stuff like that, then you'll need to create your own save system. But again, we don't need to delve into all that right now. We want to keep it nice and simple for our high score. So with that being saved, what about loading? Obviously, when our game starts, we want to load whatever high score value has been stored. So we'll go back up to the top here, and I'm going to put it in the awake function here, so it happens as soon as the game starts running. And we're going to say our high score should be equal to the player prefs dot get int. And what int do we want to get? Well, the int that we just said we were going to save. So int high score. So now our high score has been set to the value we want to get. And then we'll say, okay, well, we've got the high score, so update the high score text here. So we're going to say, we're going to copy this high score text and paste it in here. And I'm going to save this, and we're going to go jump into Unity, and we'll see that this should throw an error now, unless they've made some changes in the latest versions. If I press play, well, okay, we didn't get an error. That might have been because I was messing around with stuff earlier, but the error you would expect to occur at this point is we have no player prefs value here for high score, because as soon as your game starts the very first time, you have never saved a player pref's high score value, so it shouldn't know what to set this to. So it should go, oh, I don't know what to set that to because it doesn't exist, and it should throw an error. I think it's because I was working on this when planning, obviously. So what we need to do instead of that is, just before it, do a check and see if the player prefs dot has key high score. So this is just a way of checking, hey, does the player pref have a high score value stored? Have we stored something already? And if we have, well, then we need to set the high score to be that. But if we haven't, then it'll just ignore this, and it'll remain saying 0 on the code back here. Okay, so with that now saved, we can go ahead and play. And this time, if I play the game, and if I set a high score value, so I'll just jump over 2 of these here, and then we'll die. So now we should have a high score saved of 2. So obviously if I play again, the high score says 2, that's perfectly fine. But if I go ahead and play now, boom, we instantly get the high score being 2. So just to make sure that's right, you can see the high score is over 2, or is 2 over here. If I play the game, it shouldn't get changed when I jump over our first one. And it should update as we get over more and more. So perfect. That's our high score working correctly. The final thing we want to do though is, what if you want to add the ability for your players to remove the high score from the game? So change it back to being 0 so they can start their challenge again or whatever. What we'll do is, if I go back into the score manager, I'm going to add one more final function down here called public void clear high score. And in here we're going to say we want to delete the key that is stored as the player into the player pref. So we've saved the high score here. We're going to delete this value so that there's no value stored in the player prefs. So we'll say player prefs, if I could spell, player prefs dot delete key. Now you could delete all, and delete all won't just delete everything in your player prefs. It'll delete everything related to this specific game. So it won't delete everything that relates to any other games that you might be storing values in the player prefs. It'll only delete ones for this specific game that you're working on. But we don't want to do that. We want to delete a specific one. We're going to delete the key high score. Now, as always with stuff like this, it's really important that you spell everything the exact same and capitalize everything the exact same, because it's going to very specifically look for the capital letters to match up and the spelling to match up. So we're going to delete the key, and then we're going to say set the high score to be equal to 0, and we're going to update the high score text as well. So we'll grab the high score text update here and pop that in there like that. So we'll save this, we'll jump back into Unity. Now obviously we're going to need a way to make this happen, and I've just got a very simple button set up on my canvas. I've got a clear button. I'm just going to activate that here. So then in the on click area of this here, we need to drag our score manager in there, and then we're going to select score manager dot clear high score. So now if I press play, we'll see we have our high score of 5. If I clear the high score, there we go, it goes back to 0. Let's go to our score manager to make sure our high score is 0 there. And now if I play, I can jump over a couple of walls, clear the high score, it's back to 0, jump again, it's back to 3 because it's getting it from the score that we have here. So perfect, our high score is working correctly. And that's it. That's all you need to create a very simple high score system for your game, and a way of tracking the player's active score at the moment and making sure that we can store those values so that it keeps them between gameplay sessions. Very simple and very straightforward and easy to do. So thanks for watching this episode. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button for more Unity magic, and make sure you give this video a like so you can see more of this in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon, and see you all one more time.